without sight. Connect, collaborate, and create.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Without Sight podcast. In this episode, we host a panel discussion curated by Zenny Jabeera, exploring the different approaches that blind musicians might take to learning music and communicating musical ideas. We welcome three very special guests onto the panel. Kevin Satizabal, a composer and music journalist currently working for the BBC. Andre Louis, a jazz composer and music technology accessibility consultant. And Clare Gailans, a braille music teacher and transcriber and advocate for accessible formats for music notation. The panel compare and contrast their approaches, such as using braille music notation, learning by ear, and using notation software to explore digital scores. This episode was recorded live as part of the Sound Without Sight monthly meetup session for June 2024, featuring questions submitted by our community. We hope you enjoy.
Hey everyone, hello. Yeah, so as Jay explained, this is going to be a really special panel. We are going to be joined by three incredible guests. So we have Kevin Satizabal.
Hello everyone, good to be here.
We have Andre Louis.
Hi there.
And we have Clare Gailans.
Hello everyone.
Perfect. So this panel will be about different approaches to learning and communicating and creating music. These three guests, they'll explain themselves anyway, but they have all got different approaches. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking now and let you guys introduce yourselves properly and tell us a bit about your background and your chosen method of creating music.
So hello everyone, I'm a pianist, composer, and I have been playing music for quite a number of years now. I studied at the Royal College of Music, and Clare Gailans, who's here, was actually one of my braille music teachers for many years. So it's an approach that I've always used when learning scores of piano music, using braille music from a young age. But I've also been very interested in learning by ear. You know, before braille music, that was how I learned pieces of music. I would have a tape of a piece of music and rewind it and listen back to the chords and listen back to the notes. And I think the first piece that I ever learned like that completely by ear all the way through was probably 2 or 3 years after studying piano, and it was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement. So it's quite a special way of learning. And as I've kind of, evolved musically, I've been using braille music scores more, mainly because the music has got a bit more complicated. The chords have got harder to listen to and a bit more complicated. So I try still to use both approaches, mainly so that I can really get a sense of the score by listening to it. So I listen to the music to hear what it all sounds like, to get an overview. And then if there's anything that I'm unsure on, then I refer to the braille music score. Also, the braille music score has got the advantage that it gives me dynamic markings. It tells me what the composer is intending rather than just relying on a recording to get the interpretation. So for me, it's having a balance of using both methods. Andre, do you want to go next?
Okay, it's sort of 2 against 1 actually. I'm the odd one out in that I attempted to learn braille music and sucked at it really badly. Poor Miss Gregory tried to teach me when I was 9 or 10, and I would read a line and forget it promptly. Not because I was recalcitrant or anything, but just it didn't end up working out. And I thought, well, I'm not remembering things from week to week. So in the end, she decided, well, you're still young. I'll try and teach you by ear. And I learnt a lot by ear. And I did grade 3 jazz and... No, I didn't. I did grade 3 classical and grade 4 jazz piano by ear and sat my exams and everything this way. Now, I could at one time read braille music to some extent, but I've subsequently forgotten it in the last 25 years and don't know that I would ever kind of get it back. Although I've looked at it, it does look quite scary and intimidating, but I think that's just lack of knowledge more than anything else. I've been playing piano since I can remember. Apparently the first thing I ever played at the age of 3 on one of those monophonic Casio keyboards was the EastEnders theme, Don't Judge. Then I did lessons, as I say, for a few years, at least after I went to Worcester College age of 9. And then I went to RNC and studied music there, music technology for 2 years. I did TVU, Thames Valley University, for a year. And then I kind of went off the beaten track in terms of study and became a sort of self-taught musician. And I've been working at my own music ever since, composing and producing. And I now compose and produce for other people using Logic. I also teach Logic to blind and visually impaired students as well. So I've done a lot of things in a lot of weird ways, and very little of it has been with Braille. And that's not because I don't like Braille. I like Braille. I purposefully bought an Orbit reader when RNIB started shipping them. But Braille music is one of those things, I think, that, like learning a foreign language, takes time and effort, and you can't learn it on Duolingo. So it's going to be one of those things, I think, that if I really want to do this, I need to sit down and be disciplined enough to re-educate myself, if you will.
Could you have been really focused with like playing by ear, Andre? Because I think you once told me that when you were very young, was there an incident where there was some sort of microwave or something that chimed at some random key and you were able to tell your dad what key that was?
That's right. I was 5 or 6 years old, and the microwave did what microwaves do. And back then it wasn't digital, it was the bell. And I said to my dad, "Hey, Dad, that was an F sharp or a G or something." And he said, "No, it isn't," like adults do, because I don't listen to kids. I said, "Yes, it is." And so he went to it. He's a steel pan player, steel drum, if you don't know what that is. And he played it, and it was. And that was the start of me understanding that I had perfect pitch, because I didn't know before then.
That's amazing. And Claire, can we move on to you?
Right. Yeah. Well, I was 9 before I found out I had perfect pitch. I just didn't know what to call it. And consequently, I've used my ear a lot as well. But when it comes to learning music, I'm older than the two chaps. And in my day, virtually everybody went to special school. So I went to 2 schools for the blind. And the only way of learning music there was, and I'm not knocking it, was that we learnt the piano almost exclusively. But later on, I was given the chance to learn the flute. And in adult life, I became a singer. Part of what I went on to do, I definitely needed the notation because I studied music at King's College, Cambridge. And I then, during that time, I did do some music not involving notation. I learned tunes by ear to play in a ceilidh band, but as well as that, I sang in choirs and all sorts of stuff. Then I became a transcriber of Braille music and a proofreader for many years, and gradually got into solo singing and singing teaching, and eventually Braille music teaching, which you can't really do in isolation. It ends up being teaching a lot of theory, a lot of musicianship. And a lot of the pleasure I've had out of Braille music is not making music, but following for teaching or just following for study. It lends itself beautifully for that. And I suppose, an example Kevin and Andre have both given, but a reason I really want the music is that I want to know exactly the lengths of notes, and that I found I couldn't pick up by ear. I had a singing teacher for many years who would put things onto tape for me. I'd get them in Braille if I could, but if I couldn't, she'd put them onto tape. And there were always things that weren't precise, but I always had to make notation, even though I knew some of it wouldn't be quite right. I remember transcribing a whole aria it was turned out to be a slow 6/8, but I put it in 3/4 because there was nothing that I had seen. I just thought this sounds like 3/4. So those are the sort of things. And what inspired me to use it, well, as I've said, that was how everybody did things back then. Towards now, if you like, in my career, such as it has been, there is beginning to be technology that would help me. And now that I'm doing a bit less, I do want to master several of the software packages, and I have it definitely in mind to do it, because I think, that would open up a whole lot more music and even enable me, even if I'm getting to doing a bit less myself, to help other people to get hold of music.
Just to introduce that idea a bit further of using software to interpret or explore a digital score, I wondered if any of the three of you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, just briefly. I know we'll come on to it a bit more in detail later.
I've done a little bit of this, particularly using things like Sibelius, which is music notation software, and more recently I've started to play around with MuseScore, although I haven't played as much as I can, but I can give my sort of basic impressions. I mean, the thing that I really liked about MuseScore is that it's an open source software. It's free to use. There's also a subscription service for scores, they have a whole library of scores that have been prepared. I don't know how excellently prepared they are, but I've been using that a couple of times when I've had to learn one or two pieces really quickly, particularly when I've been accompanying singers or whatever, and they've gone, "Oh, can we learn this piece of music?" So what I've done is I've downloaded the piece from the MuseScore library, opened it up in MuseScore, and then it's obviously given me the ability to look at the score note by note, and it's usually been split into the two hands. But in MuseScore, it also has a very basic Braille transcription software. So I've been able to convert musical files into BRF files. There's other software packages like Good Feel from Dancing Dots, but that's a paid package. But for now, it's been enough, to be honest, because I've had the digital score that I've been navigating, and then I've been able to have that Braille music file, so to just check some of the notation. But it's a really great way because you can literally, have the score in your MuseScore, or you probably open it up as a MIDI file as well in something like Logic, and then you can go through it note by note and be able to listen to stuff. So that's been a way that I've started learning repertoire more recently as well.
Amazing. Thanks for that overview. So just briefly, our very first community question. So this comes from Eliza Bates, and she's asking quite broadly, how can you access Braille music? Where can you get it from?
Well, there are increasing numbers of places. Probably a lot of it is electronic now. I should have said as part of my introduction as well that I sit on the music subject area of our UK Association for Accessible Formats, and we've put together a document detailing all the countries and the detail and the addresses for them that produce Braille music. There are quite a number. We've also done a series of 6 podcasts through this UCAF group, and they're available from the music page on the UCAF website. I think they're also available from the RNIB website, because RNIB had some input as well. Kevin's mentioned MuseScore, that's another way. And there's also Hai Peng Hu, the Chinese musician, who has done some scores on his website, braille.org. And they are big orchestral scores that we traditionally couldn't get hold of, are becoming increasingly available through the ability to convert them. And there are excellent, I don't know so much about other countries, but in the RNIB over here are still producing music as much as they can, and we can still access the excellent scores produced by Golden Chord by Roger Furman over many years, and right down to extremely low-tech methods, which I have used ever such a lot. Get a friend to read it to you. I've also, something that I had written out myself, which I didn't want to trust to the post, I linked up over Zoom and dictated to somebody else who wanted it. If you're prepared to do a bit of graft yourself, it's much easier to get hold of a wide range of Braille music than you might think.
The RNIB, they do like a lot of hard copies of books and stuff as well, I believe, because I got a book from there that had like kind of all the terminology and all the stuff like that.
Certainly a few years ago, RNIB had a very extensive Braille music library, and I don't know if anybody else knows how much they've and digitizing as well, which hopefully they have, because that would be great. Because I know for Braille print books, for example, the RNIB reading services, you can either order hard copies or you can get BRF downloads from the RNIB reading services. But that's for Braille books that you can read, and I assume it's Braille music. If I have a chance in a second, I'll do a quick search and find out for you.
Yeah, so RNIB's transcription team do a really great job. It's primarily hard copies still, although they do archive everything that they do, so they can get stuff out very quickly. It's not like they do everything from scratch every time.
James saying in the chat that yes, you can obtain BRF files from the RNIB, which is really good.
And we've got a hand up just now from Adele.
Hello there. My name is Adele, and I'm a blind who lives in Ottawa, Canada's capital, of course. And in a few words, you are talking of the many ways to learn music.
Absolutely, yes.
And I learned music from first by ears and developed it with a lady named Monique with me at school, who's blind too. And now I try to find ways to learn anything for the piano, even without the score, thanks to YouTube's tutorials.
Ah, yes, that's actually a really good thing that you've mentioned there, Adele, about YouTube tutorials. As I've been using some as well, and because there's some people who do really good breakdowns of musical scores on YouTube.
There's also a format called talking scores, isn't there, which quite a lot of work has been done on. And that gives all the detail, but without the braille, without the notation. But it presupposes a knowledge of notation. So it might be more suitable if you've only recently lost sight or something.
So, hello everyone. My name is Olga Koivan. I'm a Bulgarian musician, professional organist, pianist, and now I'm studying guitar. And I've also studied song and organ improvisation as well. I wanted to very, very briefly share my methods. So they're very similar to those of Claire and I think Kevin. When I was younger, like a little child, I also used audio, a teacher of mine recorded scores for me, like pieces of music. And I was studying by ear, but then I started using braille, and in Bulgaria, there's no braille scores at all. So my mother had to type braille music for me or dictate to me, but then I discovered many libraries, and I want to comment the question of one of the spectators here regarding braille music. So it's not only in the UK that there is a braille library. I'm a member of many more libraries for the blind and visually impaired people. For example, in Leipzig, in Germany, or in Marburg, also in Germany, or in Paris, in Oslo, in Copenhagen, in Stockholm, and in Amsterdam. So there is really very, very, very wide variety of braille music, and my plan is now to learn how to use Music XML, like music score with Music XML and the Saumai software, and to convert Music XML into braille by myself, because I still have no idea. So yeah. So my opinion is braille scores forever.
Oh,
absolutely.
Awesome.
I had a quick question. When you are reading braille music from these different libraries, are there kind of major differences between some of the braille symbols that they are using, or have you found that it's pretty standardized? Because there's two prevailing methods of laying out braille music. There's sort of bar over bar, where you have the right hand over the left hand, and then there's also bar by bar, where you have a kind of more linear approach. So basically my question is, when you've been reading different scores, have you found a lot of differences when they've been prepared by different countries?
Yeah, of course. So there are differences in the writing of some of the symbols. For example, pedal or left hand, right hand. I'm not a great fan of studying by bar by bar. As a participant of the Daisy Music Braille project, which is a good friend of mine, told me at once that I am a very regarding Braille music, I'm educated in the German way, because with left hand and right hand, extract by extract, this is the more German way of transcribing Braille music. But I found it very, very useful, so I use this. Yes, so pedals can be different. Left hand, right hand can be different, differently written. What else? I can't remember.
It sounds like it's really doable once you get used to the differences. You're making it work, so that's really good.
Yeah.
I think it's great also to mention the new tools that are being developed that allow blind musicians to effectively create their own braille music from a publisher score. So something like a Music XML file that you open up in MuseScore or Sibelius, and then use one of the tools that we're talking about to create your own braille based on your preferences. So having that kind of intermediary file is super, super powerful. So I'm just going to move the conversation on. I know we've got some hands up, but I feel like we might answer some of these questions in the next section anyway. So Sarah, you were going to take the next section, comparing and contrasting these different approaches.
Yeah, hi. So I'm just going to jump in really with the first question in this section. Could you guys explain the advantages that you feel like your approach has?
Somebody who worked at RNIB once said, and it's absolutely right, Sally Zimmerman once said that if all the arguments for using Braille music apply equally if you take the word music away. So Braille music is literacy, Braille is literacy. If you are fluent in Braille text, well, you don't even need to be, but it's obviously a big advantage if you are. Why wouldn't you try and learn music? And if it's not for you, that's another matter. But so many children, sadly, and older people are not given the chance to learn it. And because it's literacy, you've got the thing right there and it's not going anywhere. Whereas if you've memorized something, it seems to me, it can go out of your head again, and you've maybe got to learn your way around it from scratch if it's been some time. Whereas if you've got it on paper or on Braille display, you can call it up again. And it's, as I've said before, it's the precision that I like. And as a singer, I don't even need to learn. And as a teacher, I don't even need to learn, because your hands can be absorbing it while playing's going on in a lesson, or singing, or if you're just listening to a recording. So many things are enhanced. You wanted to know disadvantages as well, didn't you? I suppose the big disadvantage is not all music you might need or want is available in Braille. But as we've said, there are increasing numbers of ways around that. We all just do what we need to do. A musical assignment comes along and you find whichever way is going to get you at it.
I think that's where I come in. So 99% of the things that I'm doing, learning and working with are things that people have made themselves, so there's no score for them anyway. So all of what I do is by ear. And therefore, as it's by ear and we're all play and learning in rehearsal, for example, or online, I have had no need to write stuff out. I have what I think must be a pretty good memory, because I have memorized music for at least 3 different bands that I've worked with over the last 5-10 years, and that's a lot of music. We're talking probably, 30 to 60 songs, which might not sound like a lot, but it's enough when some of them go on for 4, 5, 10 minutes. I mean, I've written things. The one thing I wrote that was kind of my magnum opus was something that I'm sure that they would have liked to have scores for. So what I did to do that was I played it out in Logic, converted that to MIDI, and Logic can actually output a PDF, which is probably not very accessible. But I gave it to people and they were able to kind of decipher what I wanted from that. And I would listen to what they played and say more emphasis on whatever note. And Kevin has heard this track. It's called Morning Incoherence. It's very, very complicated. And the head is all got to be done in unison or else. And it was really fun to get them to do that. They wanted to kill me. I'm still here. Luckily, they didn't. But, it can be done. So the advantage of being able to play by ear is that you can hear something and someone says, can you do something with this? And I'll go, probably. The disadvantage is everything Claire's already said, so I don't need to recap it. If it would be available, you know what, I'd like to say, if I had the ability to be able to just pick up a book or a Braille display and read a piece of music and just play it for myself or for other people, I'd love to. I'm not going to lie, but that's just not my wheelhouse. So I don't stress about it.
I mean, for me, I suppose I sort of feel like I'm crossing both methods. Learning things by ear. I do use Braille music, but I'm still at a stage where I'm reading it quite slowly. So things are becoming clearer over time. So, if I've got to learn a piece of music really, really fast, which often is the case, that's why I am starting to rely a lot more on digital scores and also learning things by ear. Obviously, the advantages are that I could just download a digital score and have it on my computer within minutes, if not seconds. And then I can start sort of learning music. Of course, the biggest disadvantage with doing things by ear is that you might miss a lot of the kind of granular detail of what the music should sound like according to the composer's instructions. I mean, it's interesting there that you were saying, Andre, about your morning incoherent, because you were saying actually you wanted to tell the musicians, oh, play this and play that in a particular way. And that's where, in a way, as you know, a score can give you that information. You can be really precise about exactly what phrasing to use and all of that stuff.
No doubt about that. Yeah.
That's where the advantages do lie. But we do now have this ability of MuseScore and digital scores, and for you, Andre, I think you'd love something like that, because you can play stuff in on your keyboard anyway, and then add all the instructions that you need just by using your computer. So you don't need to learn Braille music.
And I did notice recently, I've never used it, but I did notice Logic can import and export music XML too. So maybe I'll
yes, it can. That is another thing, actually. So, and then it's such a flexible format, XML as well, because people can export it and get your scores and put it into other programs, and then tweak any of the notation that you have. So definitely lots of methods for composing and learning music.
Before we move on from this, actually, one last thought I had was that my teacher at the time, Miss Gregory, said that she could not solo. So she was teaching me jazz, which was interesting. So when it came to the solo bit, she would just play through it as it was written. And it was my job to do the solo part. And I think if you're a jazz musician particularly, improv and solo is kind of part and parcel. If you can't do that, there's going to be a problem with some of the gigs that you may do. And relying solely on only being able to read and not improvise is not going to get you the gig. Now, that's not a knock on anyone who cannot, but in my line of work, it would be a disadvantage. So I don't know how soloing works in the brain. I've never studied it. It's kind of weird, but it's really interesting when every single time I play a piece, it's going to come out slightly differently.
I think blind musicians have an advantage with playing things, even those of us who read notation, because we can't always get it. I think we can cross over a little bit more easily at times than sighted musicians who are so tied to their scores. I never forget having a little bit of a rehearsal before we played for a Cayley once, and we couldn't think of a middle tune. And we said, what about My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean? It's the right sort of meter. And the wonderful sighted clarinetist could not play that by ear. And I thought, I'm not a hugely technically able musician, but I can play. Why can't you?
Yeah. I've had this discussion a lot with my dad.
There was one time talking about learning by ear, and it's just being able to understand. And there was just this little classical piece that I composed that crossed over into kind of jazz. And there was just this one little bit I wrote in quavers, and I just wrote "swing it." And this clarinetist from a very high level orchestra just could not play it. And then we spent literally about 8 hours trying to notate it 4-note lift, so he.
Where are the triplets?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Triplet. So it's I think it's from a musician's point of view, I think it's so important for people to develop their ear.
That's an interesting thought, actually. Not only reading it by rote, but being able to interpret slightly differently on top of that, even if you don't always need to. Because if you can be rigid, you can be unrigid. So there may come a time, like Claire said with Cayley, where you just need to throw in a thing, but you should be able to return to the normality as well, which is very,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting because I think scores, they can never convey every single piece of information about how to play a score. Like they're only ever a guide. Maybe that's a controversial opinion, but I feel like there's always a little bit of interpretation that is allowed. There's one question here from Nikki Keck, which kind of sums up this, or could sum up this little section. And she asks, is Braille music worth pursuing when I've been used to playing by ear throughout my entire career? What am I missing out on?
And the only one who doesn't, I would say if you want to try it, you probably should. Telling myself that too. The other two, well, I won't speak for them, but I imagine they'd say, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't any Braille at all, I suppose it's going to be harder than if you have. But I would start really simple and use the skills little and often. till they become second nature, if you really want to. If you don't really want to, you're going to fall by the wayside and be quite happy not to do it. But I've occasionally had pupils who've done well, who, aren't perhaps going to ever make the best musicians, but they love problem solving and sort of puzzles. And it's going to sometimes appeal to people like that more than just, if you feel you ought to. If you're doing it because you feel you ought to, then possibly that's not going to be enough. But there's lots of help out there if you find it is.
It's nice to find a fellow era, Nikki. I appreciate that. I'm awash in a sea of really clever people, and yeah.
I think it's about, I think we've touched a lot on this today, is about having as many different options and as many different ways to access music and learn music, but also about feeling comfortable. So if it's going to be something that you want to pursue, then, by all means, follow what makes you enjoy the music. But if you pursue braille music, even to what Claire said, to a basic level, that's absolutely fine. There's been scores where all I've read from the score has been maybe 10 bars that were just completely flummoxing me out of a 500 bar score. But am I having a go at myself about that? No, because I needed to check those 10 bars, and that was all I needed to check. And I was pretty sure about the rest. So, it's not like it's got to be one way or the other, or it's got to be what you're comfortable with, is basically what I'm trying to say, and giving yourself those options.
Cool. No, totally agree. So one more question for this section. Bill McCann, quite rightly, is asserting that memorization is key to all of these approaches. That's something that's kind of common to all of them. Do you guys have any tips on memorizing music?
One of the gigs I do, this is relevant, is a gig whereby every couple of months we tend to do 12 or so songs from various artists. Now, most of these songs are 3 and 4 chord tricks, not hard stuff. But don't ever ask me the title or how something goes until I've had a chance to put my headphones on, play the first couple of bars, and then I know the tune. Because when you have that many in such a quick space of time, I have no idea what's going on from minute to minute. So I just need that kind of turn over the engine, and then I know it. So my memorization actually comes from just being able to hear the opening bars of a thing, and then I know the rest of it because I've rehearsed it. But yeah, the first time I ever did this gig was 2017, and I didn't have that method down pat yet. So I was supposed to open up a tune as a keyboard player, the intro. I just froze. I had no idea what I was doing, and it was very bad. And then the guitarist said C sharp, and it's like, oh, okay, that one. But yeah, that's my method of memorization. It's like I hear the beginning of it, unless I know the stuff really well, and I've toured it or played it a lot. But every couple of months when you're doing new material with this, like a house band, as it were, there's just always that, okay, that's this one that starts like this, and that's this other one that starts like this. And you can do a lot of forgetting until you do a lot of remembering.
Yeah, it's so interesting that I completely share that experience with you. Somebody gives me a set list. I'm like, guys, do not bother giving me a set list. Or at least, can we just agree on the order? The worst is when people change the set list. And they go, oh, actually, let's change it just before you go on stage. And like, oh, really? Because now I've got to remember what that tune in, 0.5 was called. And the worst one is when I have to start the thing and you go, oh, gosh, okay, I really. So in terms of memorizing, if I know I've got to start the piece, if there's a piano lick, then I make triple sure that I've learnt the name and how it starts, and I practice that a lot because I know that that's the bit. But otherwise, yeah, if the drum starts, then I know I absolutely, like Andre, I'll be absolutely fine. Other memorization techniques, when I'm learning braille music, I will sort of read the first line of the right hand and then play it, and then the left hand, and then put them together and sort of just keep practicing that. I think with me, it's a lot of slow repetition. Playing things slowly, and also being careful not to learn things wrong, always double checking, particularly at the beginning when you're putting notes to memory, because once I've learned something wrong, I find it really hard to unlearn because I think I rely a lot on muscle memory. So slow practice, lots and lots of repetition, and also do yourself a favor. when you've learned something and it's taken ages, and I'm going to note this down to myself, just play it through a few times, because I've had the situation where I've spent days and days learning a piece of music, and a year later somebody goes, oh, shall we play this? And you sit down at the piano and it's completely evaporated from it.
I can identify with that one, Kevin. I often, even if it's not vocal, I often sing through things quite a number of times, just so that I've learned the geography of them, or just read quietly through them, not burst into song if I'm on a train or anything. And also I often write music out, particularly, I don't know if this is naughty now, but a lot of it's in the public domain. If I've borrowed something from the library and it's a very old-fashioned layout, I will write it out to something that is more appealing to me, more logical to me. And both of these methods, even if it's just humming along, I'm using the music. If I've done that a few times, performed it a few times, it's gone an awful long way towards memorizing itself. And I think for single line instruments, that would work as well. I used to be a flautist, and it's much easier. I'm full of admiration for you two who memorize keyboard work. I used to be able to do that up to a point, but when I tried to resume my piano studies 12 years ago, I only lasted about a year. I found they won't go in anymore. But I do use piano music a lot for teaching theory and all the rest of it, teaching purposes, just studying for my own pleasure. So I'm not totally a single line person, but as far as memorizing goes now, yes, I probably am.
I don't know if you use this method, Andre, but I mean, I'm always looking for patterns all the time when I'm learning. Is this thing repeating? Is this thing repeating but in a different key? But also, if you're playing on a piano, how does it feel? How we're playing it, and how does it feel under your hands? I think I try and use all those kind of things.
Are the pair of you synesthetic? Because
Not for music.
That's a help to me.
Only days of the week, because I'm weird.
Ah.
Amazing.
So we could probably do a whole session on memorizing music.
Yeah.
I've just put an article in the chat, which was on RNIB's website, written by James Risden, who's in the room amongst others, all around different approaches to memorizing music. So there may be some more detail there. Just to keep us on track in this discussion, I think we'll move on. And Zenny, you were going to take the next section.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more now about accessibility and integration. So this first question is, how easily can your method be integrated into mainstream kind of approaches? Like, for example, working with sighted musicians and using music software. Claire, I wanted to come to you first with that. I know you haven't used music software as much, but I'm quite interested in terms of using Braille music and stuff. How's that worked for you in terms of working with other sighted musicians?
It's mainly worked for me as a singer. And I have to say, if you don't do anything else, join a choir, because you are on an absolutely equal level with your sighted colleagues. In fact, often you're helping them out because they're so fixated on following the book that they're not looking at the conductor, or they're so fixated on looking at the conductor, they're not looking at the book. And if you've got the music as well as I know plenty of people sing in choirs with the lyrics, but we can use both and we can be really on top of it because we're not having to worry about look at the conductor. Single line instruments, similarly, I haven't played as a keyboard player in a band, but I'm sure that works really well as well.
And just quickly, Claire, I'm just kind of curious now. So obviously, I've been in choirs and things like that, and I mainly just use the lyrics and listen to the actual sung by ear. You said obviously you use both Braille music and the lyrics. Does that not overwhelm you slightly in terms of trying to keep track of both? How easy is it to picture the lyrics along with the kind of notation?
Well, the layout is very clever, actually, but unfortunately, it's a stumbling block for software so far being much good at reproducing vocal music, because with print scores, you've got your syllable often strung out over many bars. So it'll be a hyphenated syllable and lots of music. So that's no good if you're trying to follow the Braille. You've got to have meaningful words on one line, and the music, as far as your line of words goes, on the line below. That is much easier for us in Braille, but it's difficult for software to do. I do hope we'll get there one day. how I do it is I skid as quickly as possible over the words and hope that there aren't too many sort of repeating words that I'll forget the sequence of, and read the music in real time. So just move to the next bar once that bar's gone, kind of thing. And of course, it involves counting a lot of bars rest, particularly with choral music. And it really works well. I'm a one-handed reader. I suppose if I were a two-handed reader, I could have one hand on the lyrics and one on the music, but I just don't like reading two-handed. My right hand isn't sufficiently helpful. So some people were made to use both. I never was. I guess they thought, well, I'm quite fast anyway, so leave her alone.
Perfect. And Andre and Kevin, do you want to add anything to that?
For me, it's been particularly useful using braille music in orchestral rehearsals. So I play with the power orchestra sometimes. And so I learnt a lot of the score by ear, checking some of the notation with the braille score, because we were doing some Steve Reich and his chords were quite funky sometimes, and I really couldn't tell what they were. But then we went into the rehearsal situation, and I took my braille note with me that day. And then, of course, we started playing it, and the conductor was like, okay, percussion section, which included me, rehearsal figure 30. And I was like, okay, rehearsal figure 30. I had that number in the score, so I quickly jumped to 30, read the first line. I went, okay, this is the bar that I need to start from. So from that point of view, it was really, really handy, because I think I'd done a rehearsal with a much smaller group before, and they were doing rehearsal marks, and I was like, I don't know what you mean, because I was like, I've got enough problems to memorize the music, let alone remembering whether it relates to figure 30 or figure C or figure Z, So for that, I found that really, really, really helpful.
I think because of what I do and with the sort of bands I play with, it's kind of different in that it's normally just sort of go from the third chorus more than figure Z or figure Q. So it's just having learnt the material ahead of time, then someone's like, well, no one's playing the middle eight correctly, so let's all just do that bit. So yeah, it doesn't really apply in the same way as the other two, actually, I think, purely because I'm just sat behind a keyboard in rehearsals, and I either know the material or I don't, and you better know it, or you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It integrates so well that you've never had occasion to think about it, Andre.
Oh, I probably have, and I've done things wrong, or played the wrong sound, or someone says, switch from piano to strings or something, or whatever. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people around me as well aren't reading stuff, because a lot of the time we're rehearsing stuff that's been made by one of the band members, unless it's the gig I mentioned before, in which case the artist is directing the band. And that's another thing as well, is that when you hear a recording of how the artist did it in studio or whatever it was, it's never the same played live, because either the material was done sort of with an electronic outlook, 808 and trap beats and things, and we have a real drummer. So there's only so much a drummer can make hi-hats sound like 808 hi-hats. And also the feel is different because you're all in the same room and the energy is different. And so sometimes the artist would be like, well, just transpose it down a key or up a key because I've got a cold today. I need to play or sing it lower or higher and change the tempo a bit, give it a bit of swing. And we didn't have to spend 8 hours doing that. So it's so weird thinking about it, because I've never had to think about this question, actually, Zenny. It's an interesting one. I don't know if I have a definitive answer.
That's all right. Yeah, just wanted to get you guys' views on that. So the next question in this section, you guys kind of already touched on it, I feel. But the question was do you feel that your method and approach of learning and playing music is suited to any particular kind of genres or styles? And if you guys play any instruments, how do you think that kind of impacts your methods?
My method is not suited to orchestral and classical music, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Not really, because it's been written in stone and it's set that way for a reason. And as Kevin and Claire have stated a lot, quite rightly, when you read it, you understand how it was intended. by ear is not necessarily how it's intended, because that's an interpretation. But my method works very well for pop and jazz.
Do you think that do you think, I'm just curious, and any one of you can answer this, like, do you think like Braille music then could be used for pop and jazz?
Yes, it could be, and it is. I tend to think this now, that a singer gets most out of it because you need your ears free to take part, and you've got to assimilate words as well. But no, you need your ears, whatever happens, don't you? But I agree with what Andre implied, that it probably lends itself best to classical disciplines, but it would be a great help to anybody.
I mean, also in terms of interpretation, yeah, of course, like I said, I use the Braille score to help me with that. But also, I really like to listen to as many different recordings as possible, if I can, just for inspiration, and also so that you don't get attached to one particular way of interpreting something.
Yeah. And once something is memorized, there is scope for doing it a little bit differently each time, isn't there? And it would be odd if something wasn't different each time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even with classical music,
yes,
you're always playing things in a slightly different way. And I'm
You're
sure
always improvising.
Yeah, well, you're definitely improvising the interpretation.
You're sort of bouncing off other things that you're hearing, aren't you, as well?
Yeah. And, I always think repeats should be slightly different as well, and all of that kind of thing. And obviously, from your point of view, Andre, as you've said, every time you play live, it's going to be different because you're soloing and responding to the room and everything. So
it's the same with like singing as well. Like, you're always going to be different. Like, singing. Yeah.
Otherwise, live, I go to live for that raw difference and that emotion and what the musician is doing. Otherwise, I would just sit at home with a pair of headphones on.
I was just thinking about, like Kevin saying about repeats, and that's so true as well. I know, for example, one of the tracks I wrote in recent years was a track called The Perpetual Question, and I wrote it with a band online. So I wrote it initially just the outline, and then I took it to the guys. I said, look, I wrote this today. I think we could do something with it. And that was 2 years ago, I think. Last year, we took it and toured it around Belgium because we started an online band during COVID. And we went to Belgium with the band last year, and again this year, and probably again next year as well. And it's all original material. And as far as I'm aware, only one of the four of us charts music. That's Martin, the guitarist. And he does that because he, by his own estimation, says, I'm old and I can't remember things. So he writes out all the things he needs to do, and that way he knows what each tune starts and sounds like. And I know that when I get to the end of the tune, that particular tune, I always play it slightly differently. Like, the melody's there, the chords are there, but I always different it up a bit. Yes, I'm using different like that, sue me. But it just makes it a bit interesting, each time we play each gig. So when, Kevin, you said that, it kind of resonated with me, actually.
And just very quickly, because this is also another way of learning music. I just thought, you created a band online in COVID with, I presume, something like Jamulus.
Yes, it was Jamulus.
It was Jamulus, yeah, which lets you play in real time. And I just sort of think, what a great way of playing in real time with musicians. And it's also another way teaching could be used as well. Teaching.
I have taught like that.
And I've seen you have
like this.
Yeah. And how have you found that teaching?
Fantastic. One of my long-term students who's now gone off to university, we were teaching on Sonibus, which is like a P2P version of Jamulus, person-to-person instead of server-based. And I would play chords and I would say, right, you want to do improvisation, so I want you to play around these chords or vice versa. And we'd basically do like 8 bars and swap, 8 bars and swap, just to sort of give her a way of having an outlet to understand how improv could work, essentially. She is doing Braille music and stuff now, I think, and learning Sibelius and things. So yeah, she's doing big things. But it was really fun just to show, hey, you can be in your house, I can be in my house, but we can still play music together. And that's been true for the last 4 years, I think. I love it.
It's incredible. It's incredible to do. Yeah.
Whilst you just mentioned Sibelius, actually, I was just wondering about your guys' experience with that.
I used it a long time ago, but I know that a lot of work has now been done to make Sibelius accessible, because I used some custom-made scripts with Sibelius a few years ago. But because that's how I did my composition degree. But I've got to say, I haven't used the latest iteration of Sibelius, but I know a lot of work has been done to make it accessible out of the box, which is really good. I don't know, Jay, you're probably from the RNIB, or James, I know who's in the audience, probably.
Yeah, my impression is that Sibelius is still very good, still very usable. I mean, there's a whole Sib Access group, Sib Access it's called, and there's a set of tutorials as well. I also know that the MuseScore team have put a ton of effort into making MuseScore more screen reader friendly, and I think arguably it's probably overtaken Sibelius in terms of a screen reader friendly notation package. I've never done a direct A/B comparison, but I guess just based on feedback that I've heard, that's my impression.
Brilliant. And for anyone who doesn't know, Sibelius is basically a music notation software named after Sibelius, the composer. And, you can input notation on the keyboard, on your laptop keyboard, or computer keyboard. You can also play in on your actual keyboard. And it's just a very, very powerful tool.
Does it translate it for you if you played it in with a keyboard?
Yeah. So if you,
it's amazing.
It translates it so you can play, and then you can edit it and add whatever you need. The length of the notes, the dynamics, expression marks. You can do all of that with these kind of softwares as well. And I have actually had situations where I think I kind of improvised stuff on the piano, and then imported the MIDI file, and then edited it and created a score out of it. So you'd be able to use it in that way.
That's great. That's really inspiring. And just, one more thing to add there, which is back on MuseScore. I don't know whether you've used the live braille features in that, Kevin. I know they're still fairly rudimentary, but it's the only software so far where you can type in music in braille and have that replicated on your braille display, or open up a MuseScore file or a music XML file and have it under your fingertips bar by bar and scroll through it live.
I think my weekend has just disappeared because I haven't heard about that, so I'm going to give it a go.
I'm going to make your weekend disappear because I'm going to give you this track and see if you can learn it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Amazing. Well, just to sum up this section, I'm just going to ask the big question. Do we feel like there's a better approach of the three that we're talking about? And do we feel like braille music is still relevant in the modern world?
Of course it's still relevant. Even if I don't use it, it's still relevant. It's important to know how to read, even if you don't read music. Braille, irrespective of music, braille is important. It's literacy, as Claire said.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I honestly, I think it's criminal that children are not even being taught text braille in schools, let alone braille music. Because, when you think back to the fact that before braille came along, being blind was so tough because you could not access education, and Louis Braille came up with this system, and even in his lifetime he wanted to open it up to education, and people challenged him all the way till he passed away because they didn't trust the system, or they didn't think blind people could do it. So just for that, to honor Louis Braille's legacy for also bringing braille music to us, because he was also an organist, I think it's vitally important. Before there was always the thing of, it's all very bulky and cumbersome and there's lots of scores, but now a lot of work is being done to make scores digital. There's a lot of work that the RNIB are doing and other places working directly with publishers, Jay has mentioned, to get these scores there. And I think just explore it, and explore all of these methods that we've tried, because I think we've all proved, we're all able musicians and we're all making it work in our different ways. So I think, whatever gets you in front of that audience, playing your instrument or composing, then use that method. And
absolutely.
And everyone's different as well.
Yeah. And while there are still people who have used braille music all their lives, and some people who can transcribe manually, the software solutions they're so nearly able to do everything that we want them to do. Huge progress has been made, but we really need to somehow get more people knowing how easy it is to use, starting off with the very basics and taking it as far as you want to, while there are people who have been fortunately given the chance learn about it.
And I think it's really is to do with like how you've been taught, because really interestingly enough, we had a couple of community questions from James and Kate Risdon, who were kind of talking about the relevance of Braille music. And they both of them made a really interesting point that, you know, we're taught other things like other codes with Braille, like maths and science and languages. Why is there such a negative stigma based on Braille music when it's just another code? And I really do think it's to do with kind of like just the priority that it's been given, or lack of, should I say, and, you know, the ways that we've been, you know, made to learn it. Like, I mean, I remember when I was learning Braille music, I was studying music as a GCSE subject, and I never was really introduced to Braille music until literally about a couple of months before the actual exam. And basically what happened was I was just thrown a book and was just told, hey, go and learn this now. And I was like, well, no, this is not going to happen. So, yeah, I think that there needs to be like more work done to improve that, especially for children and just people in general. There's like a lack of qualified QTVIs, I feel, and other people within music. And that is really just such a big issue.
I wasn't taught music theory until college because my music teacher was like, I don't know how to teach you because we can't teach you to sight read and we don't know music Braille. And now that I know what I know, I'm like, I could have still learned theory without Braille. Like that's the one thing that really annoys me.
Yeah, but there are so many musicians who would be up to helping with it and introducing it. If they could only be persuaded that it's not difficult. They might be boggled because the layout is so different from a print stave, but children will be, well, not every, it's not for everybody, but if you like, if it's the sort of thing you like, you wouldn't be boggled, you'd be astonished and excited by an F crotchet being the same as an ER sign, or whatever it might be. It's clever.
So if you're given the time to do it, you'd be able to do it. Like, you'd be able to learn it if you're given the right time and approach.
So we're just coming on to the topics that have been asked by our community members, actually. Ella and Taryn, I know you've had your hands up for ages, and I will come to you in just a second. But just while we're on the topic of education, does the panel think that Braille music code is inherently more difficult to learn than stave notation would be for a sighted musician? Or do we think it's because there might be fewer teachers and resources and therefore just less support generally?
I don't see why it needs to be more difficult. I mean, sighted musicians have the thing of being able to know in which direction to go, I suppose. From that point of view, they've got it easier. But in my experience, sighted musicians don't find it all that easy to read music unless they have done it all their lives, sort of thing. I think, given the wanting to do it, it really needn't be any more difficult.
Of course, being sighted and having stave notation, you can have a score in front of you and glance at a score and get a lot of information in a very short space of time. And that is going to take slightly longer when you're reading Braille music. But I don't think that's got anything to do with the learning of it, because actually all of the concepts are the same. You're learning about the different notes, you're learning about the clefs, you're learning about the position of the notes and all of that stuff. Yeah, there's this view that Braille music's really difficult, but I think that's because people don't spend enough time with it. Like you say, there aren't enough teachers, and there are professionals who are discouraging people to learn text Braille, let alone Braille music. So I think there just needs to be more done in terms of promoting Braille music. QTVIs, for example, also seeing the potential of blind musicians and getting them in touch with whatever support is available to learn Braille music, because that's how I got into music. It was my QTVIs that heard about a scheme in the Royal College of Music that were doing a scholarship for blind musicians, and that's how I got into music. If I hadn't heard of that, then I wouldn't have got into it. I wouldn't have met Claire. I wouldn't have learned about Braille music. So, that education point and that support and all these organisations talking together, the local authorities, the RNIB, all of that is really, really, really important. And the other thing is that, touches on this, it's amazing how many people have said about, Claire, you've been writing out your own scores in a format that's a bit more readable. Olga mentioned, and teacher recording tutorials and things. I wish there was a way that we could all kind of, and I think Sound Outside is doing this, upload all of this stuff somewhere so that people can benefit from it, because we're all finding our own ways to cope. And I think sharing all of that is really important to help
That's
everyone.
the plan, and we're seeing it in the chat. Just it's absolutely like, a message every minute, and it's great to see just everyone that's here supporting each other, and it's just really, really inspiring. So Kate Risdon was asking quite specifically, how do you think we can challenge the belief that Braille music is difficult and irrelevant for blind children when we expect their sighted peers to learn stave notation? Is there anything specific that we can do to kind of reframe?
Well, I think for me now kind of show what's possible. I mean, you've got, like you just said, live Braille with MuseScore. We need to get people doing TikToks and stuff about it. We need to get education professionals around the table to have these kind of discussions. And Jay, I know you're very good at setting up a good round table, so maybe.
Absolutely, and that's almost what this is. And I know I don't want to call them out, but we've got some representatives here from mainstream music education hubs, for example, which is great to see.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So yeah, I really hope that we can continue this work, and I will say that RNIB are working super hard at the moment, especially around accessible formats in music education. So yeah, exciting things coming that I can't quite share, but there will be a whole load of resources coming for music educators to support them to produce Braille, for example. So yeah, lots of potential, and I'm really excited. So I'll go to some hands now. Ella, did you still want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi. I'm not here to ask a question, but I do want to make a comment, and I actually want to share about an orchestra in Egypt that is comprised entirely of blind female musicians who are using Braille music and really are thriving with it. So
Wow.
I first want to answer I have nothing to do with them. I just did a lot of Google searching on them. So to introduce myself, my name is Ella. I am from Canada. I play piano, violin, and viola, all to a relatively high level. And I am a college student right now. I'm studying something completely unrelated to music, but I love playing. I could have gone into music, but it was just for financial stability concerns. I just felt it wasn't a great choice. But I do play violin in a high-level community orchestra, and I love using Braille music. I learned a lot by ear growing up, but that was just partly because it was just harder to get access to music. But I've now learned, as I got older, I got independent with technology, and I've found ways to get myself the music that I need. So it's great. But also, yeah, for non-classical things, yeah, I do find that my ability to learn by ear is really helpful. And also just working with recordings as well is also really helpful. So yeah, but my favorite reason for using Braille music is, I'm going to go back to what Claire said at the very beginning about the whole, where she was trying to learn something that she thought was in 3/4, but it ended up being in 6/8. Just the rhythmic accuracy aspect of that. I find Braille music really helpful for that, because, when I learn advanced classical stuff by ear, sometimes the rhythm might not be what you think it is. And if I learn something by ear, someone usually has to correct me, when if I had the music in front of me, that wouldn't be an issue. But anyway, I did a whole bunch of research online about an orchestra in Egypt. I stumbled upon them, called the Al-Na Wal Amal Orchestra. They are located in Egypt. They are comprised entirely of blind female musicians playing string, bowed string, woodwind, brass, and percussion instruments. So a very standard symphony. They are part of an association called Light and Hope, which is intended to integrate blind individuals, blind women into society. And their orchestra is one of their biggest activities there, because their orchestra has actually gone on tour to over 25 countries or whatever over the course of 30 years or something like that. And so they've given a lot of concerts around the world. So they're quite well known. And the reason I want to share about them is because this orchestra learns everything using Braille music. And the way it works is that I think in second grade or whatever, the kiddos learn, basically they spend their first year studying music theory. So they learn how to read Braille music their first year, and then in the second year, they get to choose their instruments. So I guess having that theory year really helps them learn the code. But I think the main thing that we can take home from this orchestra is that they Braille music is a learnable skill. And I think learning to read Braille music, with the right support and the right resources, it can be learned. And keep in mind, they're in Egypt. Egypt is a developing country. They don't have as much in terms of technology or resources as we do in the West. So considering that, I really have to give a big hats off to them, because in some ways they're a little more disadvantaged than we are here in the West. And the other thing, I think that we can learn from them, and I think we would really benefit if we in the Western world could become more familiar with their story, because I think there is a lot that we can learn from their orchestra. I think that Western blind musicians I think that they would love to know about us blind musicians in the West, especially those of us that are playing orchestral instruments, because we're out there, and I think they could really, I feel like we could, those of us like me, I feel like I could really bond with them in a really meaningful way. And so I think that's great. And I think as far as accessing Braille music, I think everyone, or the resistance against Braille music, everyone has made excellent points about that. But I think for instrumental music, the biggest issue, I think, is still just the fact that we physically cannot read and play our instruments at the same time. And I think that's still a huge point of resistance. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we need to overcome, is just the issue of being unable to read and play at the same time, because that's just a physical limitation we have to live with. And so how do we make Braille music appealing, even though there is this physical limitation? So I'm going to share a Reddit post that I wrote about the All No Wal Amal Orchestra in the chat. I wrote a lot more details about them in that post, and I've got a whole bunch of links to news articles and videos about them. There's a lot of information online that you can find in both English and Arabic. So I'm going to leave it there. I know that was long, but thanks for my TED Talk about this orchestra.
Oh, it's wonderful.
That's
Can't
amazing.
wait to hear them.
Yeah,
I'll
they
be
sound
checking
great.
That out. That sounds really interesting.
It's really interesting because, like, Claire, you did mention about like the accuracy that you can get with Braille music. I think that's a really big thing. Like, I think especially if you're playing with, like, let's say you're playing with an orchestra or a band or something, like if you're just purely doing it by ear, it could be a little bit difficult to kind of like to measure the accuracy. Whereas with Braille music, it's really easy to measure. But yeah, I think, Ella, you got a really good point. Like that orchestra sounds amazing. And I really do think that we just all need to come together and just learn from each other. Like, and if they're all able to, play all whilst just using Braille music, and, we're here still kind of struggling, then we really do need to like work together and find like that common ground of trying to kind of play it and learn it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, totally agree. So next hand up was from Taryn.
Okay, awesome. Talking about, y'all were talking about Sibelius, and I was actually kind of wondering about how well it has improved for accessibility. And, I have a choir director who does all his scores in Sibelius and sends them to me in MuseScore, which is great. But it seems like, but I've found that there's some flukage in translation between MuseScore and Sibelius sometimes. So I've toyed with the thought of saving up and maybe getting Sibelius. I'm just wondering, like, how worth it y'all think it would be to do that. And talking about also, being able to read and play, that is the challenge with Braille music and instrumentals is, I play uke as well as sing. And, with singing, it's actually not hard for me to use the Braille music to, learn the notes and sing them, maybe play a reference note on a keyboard to help me out, get going. But yeah, I think that is the challenge for music.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly just on the specific point around Sibelius. If it's just getting to grips with Sibelius itself, there is a free plan now. It's quite limited in that you can only have a few staves. But if it's just for trying it out, seeing if it works for you with a screen reader, it's worth trying that free plan for a little bit. There is a really annoying limitation, which is that you can't export music XML with the free version. So there's a big caveat there. But I would also
What about
recommend
importing somebody else's XMLs?
I think import and export, it's a no-go, but I wonder if there's some kind of incompatibility issue with the version of Sibelius. I know ideally you would install, or they would install an extra plugin or two for Sibelius that makes it a much higher quality music XML file that I assume they would give you, that you would then open in MuseScore. Is that what you're doing?
Right. He's exporting them to MuseScore or to Music XML.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it might be that, so I can see Sarah's just written in the chat, there's a plugin called Dole, which should improve the quality of the Music XML score that's exported from Sibelius.
Is that DOLET, I take it?
Yes,
Yeah?
it is, yeah.
I'll have to look that up and see if he has it. Awesome.
Sorry, Taryn, I thought you wanted Braille music. If you wanted Braille music, I was going to suggest that you export your Sibelius to Music XML, which you can do from the main Sibelius package, and then you can run it through whatever translation package you want. I'm sorry if I misunderstood what you were trying to do. What I was just saying is that you don't need to run it into MuseScore and then run it into Braille music, because you're just adding a layer to the process, and that's just
Are there any good free Braille packages? So he could send it to me as a Sibelius file or still as an XML?
If he sends it to you as an XML file, you can run it through the Salmi Braille tool, the Make Braille package. There's two decent online tools. I guess Jay and Sarah and folks can put the links in the chat. There's also, just a plug, he's on the call, but James Bowden has done the majority of the work. There's a really good document which has been worked on over the last few months, which I think is on the Sound Without Sight website, which lists all of the kind of Braille transcription tools that are available and some of the limitations of them, where they might work best for you.
Okay, I might have to look that.
Have a look on the Sound Without Sight. I'm pretty sure it's on there. Otherwise, we can put a link to it somewhere in the notes.
It is indeed. I'll add a link as well.
It's really good. I had the idea and James did all the work. So I was just going to say, well, I've got the microphone. My take on a lot of this stuff is that we set this up always, these discussions, and I've been involved in these discussions for decades. They're always very binary, like audio versus Braille, good versus bad, difficult versus easy. I think it's all just music, and most of us, to be honest, learn by ear, by Braille. We do whatever we can get our hands on, and we do whatever is quickest and most efficient and most thorough for the job that we're doing. And it doesn't have to be this binary thing. And I think actually asking questions like, is Braille music still relevant, or is anything better, actually just undermines the whole business, those of us who try to earn bits of our living from Braille music, because actually there's plenty of people who are really keen to support the production of Braille music and the availability of it, but they're not going to do that if there are constant questions about whether it's relevant and why it's so difficult to use. So actually,
James,
it's beholden on all
saying...
of us to kind of fly the flag.
Yeah. We were saying that, but I think just before we came on air, James, so that's no good, is it? Just as well to remind us to say it on air.
And the other thing, just very quickly, Kate was asking about ways of getting people to do this. I think we also conflate Braille music with music theory and time spent learning just how music works. So I think that the code, as I put in my question to the panel, is not any more difficult than Braille science codes or modern languages codes. It has a rather beautiful logic. What's difficult is turning that into sound, and that requires you to have a good understanding of pitch and theory and sharps and flats and tones and semitones. It also requires you to have a good understanding of how rhythm works, and until you do that, Braille music will always remain a rather impenetrable load of dots. If you
because knowing the symbols
yeah.
doesn't, knowing the symbols isn't good if you don't know what the heck sharp is gonna do for you.
Wait, you've got to be able to read. You've got to be able to read it. That's exactly right. You've also got to be able to read it quickly enough. And I think there's a real, Kevin, you mentioned that the lack of Braille tuition and the fact that many people are being discouraged from learning Braille. I see this all the time in my work. People who really should be learning Braille aren't being encouraged to learn Braille, and those that are finding any way, which way and how to avoid reading Braille in the kinds of volumes that we probably did when we grew up. And that gave us fluency. And if you can read Braille music fluently, you can be able to read a melody or a rhythm or a pattern more quickly than if you're really trying to decipher each sign. And is that a dot 126, or is it a something else? You need to have some kind of fluency, and the only way you can get that is by reading and reading and reading and reading. And I don't think many kids are doing that. So that's why Braille music is suffering, because the Braille music theory and the fluency aren't there to underpin it.
I think though as well, like theory in general, not even just Braille music theory, but like theory in general for sighted people as well. Like it's not really taught until like later. Like, when we were studying music, because I went to a mainstream school, it was mainly just like, obviously in primary school, just like messing around, playing instruments. Nobody really did anything. When we got to secondary school as well, like, it was, let's see how much noise we can make on this keyboard. And it burst everyone's eardrums. And that was what it was like for the first couple of years until GCSE. So we didn't really even start to learn, like even my sighted peers didn't even really start to learn music theory or music notation until like, years kind of 10 and 11, which is literally the last years of like secondary school. I mean, obviously you had some people that were learning it privately, but obviously not every person has that privilege to do that. So I don't even think it's just an issue in terms of blind people learning it. I think it's genuinely an issue just in general that we're not taught theory until much later.
Yeah. And it's obviously harder as well to learn the older you get, because you get set in your ways. And
and if it's left till GCSE sort of time, you've got too much else to do, haven't you?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So younger age is better.
Yeah, absolutely. Jay, I think, do we have a couple more community questions before we go to?
Yeah, we've got a few more. I'm just going to really pick and choose which ones we go to, because I'm aware of everyone's time. So I think one that's quite important, and we'll cover quite a lot of the other ones. Alexandra Poole is asking, where can I learn more about Braille music, and how can I get into learning it as a sighted person?
Well, there's a lot on the ucaf.org. That's UKAAF for UK Association for Accessible Formats music page. It's a general access organisation, but it does have a page dedicated to music. And James has mentioned I think I've mentioned the thing of sources of music. James mentioned the document about the different softwares, but there's also one there's information about teaching materials. And depending on which country you live in, there are different books available. There are our podcasts, which you can also reach from the music page. And of course, if a sighted teacher is wanting to learn, it's what the children are beginning on is not difficult musically, so the sighted teacher can learn kind of one step ahead of them and be very comfortable very quickly, because they're the musician. They're an experienced musician and won't need every step explaining, just need to really learn a new code and a new layout.
And is there like an association of Braille music teachers or anything like that you're aware of, Claire?
There used to be. There's not. I mean, there's a more informal network of us. Some of us are on the UCAS group, and there are others. There's a lot of word of mouth passing around, people who want to learn Braille.
I will just, there is a more robust option coming soon.
Oh,
can't quite speak about it publicly, but the barrier to finding a Braille music teacher will hopefully be lowered soon, certainly in the UK. So exciting things coming there that I can't say too much about. But I've just put a link in the chat, which is RNIB's resources for learning Braille. So there's a Braille music course on there. It's a self-service document for sighted learners. And there's also recommended materials there, so books effectively for learning music Braille. But we would absolutely love for there to be more interactive ways of doing this. And it's something that I think RNIB has a long-term interest in developing, hopefully alongside music hubs, so it's integrated into the English kind of music education system. So again, watch this space on that. Okay, so I'll just choose a couple of questions that are more on the technology side of things. I know we've covered them very briefly, but there's a few people asking about, ways that someone who is completely blind might be able to take a PDF or a print score and get Braille music out the other end. Are there any pieces of software that can allow that workflow to happen independently without support?
Yeah, so we've mentioned a few things. There's the Good Feel package from Dancing Dots, but that's very, very pricey, as I know people have been mentioning on the chat. And then there are other free softwares. I think James touched on a couple just now earlier, so they'll be put in the resources afterwards in this call. And then, like I said, that we touched on, MuseScore can also do some very rudimentary exporting into Braille music and live Braille, as Jay just mentioned earlier. So another way. But I think with PDF scores, I think I don't really know how that would work, but I think the best option really is getting an XML file from the Sibelius score or whatever, which is why I think publishers are providing more XML files, because they are so much versatile and flexible, and you can export stuff to BRF and so on.
Yeah, so PDFs can be a little bit tricky. And there are some solutions, optical music recognition or OMR, different pieces of software do have that function or advertise that function. I would say none of them are 100% accurate, so probably would still require some sighted assistance. If you scan in a score or you import a PDF, it will do its best and will do a pretty good job. But yeah, probably will need a bit of checking. But so MuseScore has one built in. It's a bit of an experimental feature. There are a whole host of others actually, and even Good Feel has its Sharp Eye component that will try to do that. It won't work with PDFs, unfortunately, but it will scan. But yeah, PhotoScore is another one. So the DAISY consortium did a review of some of the biggest ones recently. That's available on their website, which I think we will include that in the resources as well. Sorry, Claire, I cut you off.
No, I was only going to say that I've often heard it said that with XML files, they are very variable in quality. So sometimes you might be blaming that for the standard of the result that you get out, but sometimes the raw material is not so good and other times it's good. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, no, totally agree. So I'm going to cherry pick one more question from the technology section, which is going back the other way. What software might blind musicians be able to use to transcribe stave notation for sighted musicians? I know, Andre, you touched on this earlier.
Probably much of the same. I've exported MIDI, and I even exported a PDF once. Couldn't read it myself because it was not in a decently readable format, but I was able to give it to band members and they were able to decipher something. So it worked. I used the print to PDF on the Mac, and it did a thing. Whether that thing was usable much, I don't know. But yeah.
Great. That's great to hear. And again, a little plug for the live Braille in MuseScore, in that you can enter 6-key, fairly rudimentary support at this stage, but you can enter notes into MuseScore as Braille, and it will show up as stave notation in the program.
Awesome.
Okay. I mean, we have a whole host of questions, but I think we've covered most bases there, because I'm aware we've been going a little while. So I think I'm going to draw the panel to a close there. Zenny, did you want to say any closing remarks?
Yeah, it's been so lovely having you three here. Honestly, thank you so much. It's been great seeing everyone and having everyone's interest as well. I've been looking at the chat. It's been going wild. It looks really interesting, and everyone's like just helping each other out in the chat. And it's just lovely to see. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, the chat has been very lively, which is great.
Yeah, it's been a good chat.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sound Without Sight podcast. Sound Without Sight is a community-driven online knowledge hub, collating information and resources to support blind and partially sighted musicians and audio engineers to break down access barriers. If you're a visually impaired musician or audio engineer, why not share some solutions you found on our knowledge hub? You can learn more and get involved at soundwithoutsight.org. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please consider making a donation to support the project. You can do so at soundwithoutsight.org/donate. The music you're listening to was kindly contributed by community member Mackie Jones of MapleMixProductions.com.